Ladies and gentlemen, it's that time again. Season 2 of Dragonflight is over, and it's time to take a look back, see what happened, and make a freaking tier list. So just first of all, to get us started, a little bit of background. This season, best key that I did was about a 21. So the perspective I'll be having this from is from, about that. I think my ending score at the end of the season across my two main characters was about 2.5k. And then as you can see here, my most played specs were mainly Shadow Priest, Balanced Druid, and Resto Druid, a little bit of Outlaw Rogue, a little bit of Enhancement Shaman. So that's the context in which we're making this tier list. So let's just go ahead and get into it. We'll be ranking these, S being the best, F being just a terrible dungeon. And Brackenhide Hollow. I would say this dungeon was much, much better than we expected going into it. I think the obvious thing to anyone who did this as a +0 at the very beginning of the expansion, this seemed like it was going to be hell, but it actually turned out to be quite good. I think it's solidly an A. I don't know that it quite had enough to really push it to S for me personally, but you know what? I was always happy to do Brackenhide. I'm going to put it in an S. Next thing on the menu, Freehold. Freehold goes in F tier for Freehold, and that's not a meme. I hate Freehold with a burning, fiery passion. This dungeon could be so much better, but there's so many decisions that were made to make it just unfun to play. In the starting area, you've got the stupid green goo that's just getting dropped on you the whole time. It's like, okay, sure, I get it. It's a mechanic, but like, it's just the most obnoxious thing in the world. First boss, whatever. And then we get into the next part. Like, okay, I will say they removed the RP element from the kind of second area with the captains. Okay, good. Definitely good change. However, there is a mob in that area right before the captains that puts a debuff on you that says, if you jump, you get stunned. Okay? If anyone's playing a video game, of all, if you're playing a video game where you control a character, you need to be able to jump. That's just facts. And then if you, as a game developer, punish somebody for jumping in a video game, no, don't do that. We hate that. I won't speak too much about the second boss because I think it's pretty clearly universal that everyone kind of dislikes Captain Eudora in particular. It's definitely a little bit more of a toned down version of it in this season than it was back in BFA, but still a fairly obnoxious boss fight. Then you get into the trash going to the next part, which not even to mention the fact that there's a good 2 minutes of RP that you just can't skip. Why is that there? The mobs there, the harpooners are the worst. You can't chain harpooners with the big dudes because inevitably somebody's going to get harpooned into the AoE circles as they're going down to the ground. Okay, fine. That's just mechanics, whatever. But still, these are all compounding factors. And then we get to the shark boss. And this is, in my mind, the most egregious thing about the entire dungeon. The shark boss could be very cool, right? You've got this concept where there's these two ghost sharks that go out and they chase people around. You've got the blood puddles to deal with them, and they always follow the closest person to them. Okay, so to me, what that means is, okay, if I'm playing the healer, which I do fairly often, and especially Resto Druid, it's very mobile. Okay, I can see, the melee got a shark on them. I can run in there and pull it out and use my abilities as a very mobile healer to take some stress off of the melee. This would be a very cool thing to be able to do, but no. They decided to make them just stutter step in the most unintuitive, clunky way imaginable. I guess it's supposed to be some sort of stupid fish out of water mechanic. No. You had an opportunity to make a very good, engaging, and rewarding mechanic where, at the base level, just cut it into the puddles. Fine. But there's also this opportunity to have the ability to make the lives of your DPS players better. Just make them smooth. If the sharks moved smoothly, this dungeon would be an S tier dungeon. I would be willing to overlook all the other ridiculousness in here, but that alone, it's unforgivable. I'm going to leave it there. I'm done talking about Freehold. That dungeon makes me so angry. Halls of Infusion. I'm going to put this at a B, only because it felt overtuned for where I was at and what I was playing. The gauntlet section before the final boss was incredibly punishing. That oftentimes, I don't know, the inundate cast from the mini boss, and I don't know. I will say there were some positive things about Halls of Infusion. Anytime you have, especially like that first section in Trash, where like you have to have some really high coordination, it's very rewarding to do that successfully. So I'm putting this in B just because of like the difficulty of pugging. But I don't necessarily think it was a bad dungeon overall. There were a lot of very punishing things about it. The frog boss, for example, like that always would kind of just end runs in a lot of cases for me. Let's go to Neltharian's Lair. I'm going to put this at an A. We ran a lot of Neltharian's Lair. In fact, I'm pretty sure if we scroll down here on, yeah, there it is, 42 runs in total. The Mark of Dargul, which was a trinket out of there, was a trinket we were trying to target for one of our regular players. Yeah, I don't know. I liked it. We got it really dialed in. It wasn't too overtuned, I felt like. Obviously, like, the first boss on Tyrannical early on in the season was definitely very challenging, trying to figure out how to, like, line up your damage reduction cooldowns so you could survive the stomps and things. And yeah, just I thought that actually the routing in Neltharian's Lair was very interesting. There's a lot of different options you had with how you wanted to pull things. And yeah, you just had a lot of options. So solid A tier on Neltharian's Lair. Neltharus, I'm going to throw it in the F tier. Maybe a bit controversial, but I don't think that's going to be too controversial. The fact that chains were a thing in Neltharus just completely overshadows the rest of the dungeon. It made the whole place just kind of have a bad taste in your mouth. Not a fan. Uldaman, I'm going to put this in A. Another very challenging dungeon, especially on tyrannical weeks. You know what? I'm going to talk about it, then I'm going to reconsider. There's a lot of very punishing mechanics, a lot of things where you need very specific classes and class abilities to handle. So, for example, the bleed from the third boss, Mass Dispel. Actually, you know what? Mass Dispel is an interesting one in Uldaman because it was, I would say, just about required for the third boss, the fire dude, but a very nice to have for the end Trash Gauntlet. So that's kind of like, I guess, a net even on Mass Dispel there, because I think that it being effectively required for a tyrannical fourth boss, that's not so good. But being a really nice to have for the Gauntlet, which you can handle that debuff without a priest just fine. That is a good example of where Mass Dispel was nice. Just touching back, Halls of Infusion, Mass Dispel. You know what? Yeah, I'm bumping it down to B. The only reason I really had it in A to begin with, because I think that anytime there's a dungeon where boss mechanics are very challenging but very overcomable, that's a good dungeon to me. Because if I early on in the season, or really any time in the season, have 2 or 3 runs where we're like struggling through a tyrannical version of the place, I like really learn those bosses, and then that's the point at which I feel like I can make a good judgment on them as to whether or not they're fun or interesting or engaging to play. And I do think the bosses in Uldaman were pretty engaging, and definitely able to be overcome. Yeah, okay, so Underrot is the next one. I'm gonna just put this one solidly in A. I was never like a huge Underrot enjoyer, but it's also just kind of a fine dungeon. Shout out to the second boss, the Crag Charger guy, for being a little bit overtuned on Tyrannical, in my opinion. Again, another boss that we kind of got dialed in pretty well by the end of it, figuring out good places to bait the charge, and then just like, if it's Tyrannical and it's a high key or like a challenging key for us, you're doing mechanics, not DPS. That's the way you overcome it. Kind of an interesting thing too, where you could, especially on tyrannical weeks, if you wanted to lust the first boss, then you could just clear Trash and bosses even until your lust is back up, and then backtrack to the second boss. That was kind of a neat little optimization you could do if you felt like you needed the bloodlust to kill it, which in most cases you really don't, but it's kind of it's a fun little metagamey thing you can do. All right. And then final Vortex Pinnacle. This one's... I think that my Vortex Pinnacle and my Freehold opinions are going to be my most divisive ones, but I'm throwing this one up in S tier. And the main reason for that is the delta between how I felt about Vortex Pinnacle doing it in time walking over the past however long time walking has been available, and doing it in Dragonflight Season 2. The changes they made in Vortex Pinnacle for Dragonflight Season 2 were I was very impressed by. Obviously, I know there were some issues with this dungeon at extremely high levels of play, but that ain't me. And where I was playing at, this dungeon felt very good. The only really annoying thing about it are the shield guys at the very beginning. Anytime there's a directional shield in World of Warcraft, it's just a huge eye roll for me. But the fact that you could literally just kind of ignore them and just keep going made it sort of like, all right, well, we'll look past this. But yeah, like a lot of really cool, interesting big AoE packs, which involved, interesting counterplay there. I think all three of the bosses, so the first boss is pretty straightforward, not super interesting, but definitely a bit of a healing check. Second boss, also a big healing check. Yeah, so Vortex Pinnacle, the second boss in Vortex Pinnacle is definitely challenging. That one, if there was like a pug killer in there, it's probably that one. It's very punishing if you're not preemptively moving for mechanics. Yeah, and then the last boss, definitely just like you just got to muscle through that thing. But for all the times I did it, it never felt insurmountable. There definitely were some instances where we did not finish the dungeon, but I think that was mostly due to people giving up prematurely as opposed to not being able to do it. So there you have it. Pretty even split across all my different tiers. How about that? I don't know. Anything else I want to say? The lack of a seasonal affix for the first time since the end of Legion was honestly kind of just not even noticeable, to be honest. I think there's a lot to be said about, what are we losing by not having seasonal affixes? Because, you talk to anybody about the Relic season with and Woe, or Awaken season at the end of BFA with the obelisks and the skips. Those seasons were just the absolute best. But then you talk about, like, I didn't even play Beguiling really, but that sounded like it was just the absolute worst. So, it seems like these seasonal affixes give you a lot of variance, but at the same time, sometimes you have some real stinkers of seasons. Honestly, I do hope that they just bring back and Awakened at some point, like just straight up. I don't know, for a Fated season or whatever, but yeah. Definitely miss those good seasonal affixes, but I don't think Dragonflight Season 2 was any worse because we didn't have a seasonal affix. Yeah, I think that about wraps it up. I definitely enjoyed playing Dragonflight Season 2. It certainly felt a little bit more difficult overall to me. Possibly because I focused a little bit more on playing DPS as opposed to healing. In the past, I feel like I've kind of snuck my way into higher level groups when I was just pugging by myself, just due to the fact that nobody wants to play healer and I was willing to do it, and that made me be able to get invited to higher level groups than I would on a DPS. Who knows? We'll see how Season 3 goes. Stay tuned in the channel for, I don't know what else is going to come for Season 3, but hopefully some interesting stuff. All right, y'all take care. This was fun. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Always love a good tier list. We'll catch you later. Adios.